Good afternoon, everybody. I know it's a kind of a small turnout, but we'll go ahead and get started. And this is being live streamed or recorded, and so we'll have some time for Q&A. And Katie's got these Fargo branded microphones, if you can use those during the Q&A part of this. So my name is Nicole Crutchfield. I'm with the City Planning Department. We're excited today to have Interface Studio. We hired them, I guess about 6 years ago to kick off a Downtown in Focus, which is a downtown master plan. And it's been about 5 years since the plan's been adopted. Obviously, a lot has changed. And so we've rehired the Interface Studio team to help us do a little deeper dive on how implementation is going, eventually turning out a report card, if you will, and then also to have some focus group sessions and one-on-one meetings to kind of understand where some of our barriers are and what might need to adapt accordingly. So with that, I'll introduce Scott Page, and he'll have a presentation with you. We also have Ashley in the back of the room, if you have any questions for her. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Good afternoon. I want to just say a few words before I jump into this. I think it's really important that we all acknowledge that great downtowns don't happen by accident. They're always the product of good planning, focused implementation, all of those key partners moving in the same direction. I think it's also important to acknowledge the fact that there's been a lot of downtown planning, not just in Fargo, but in other cities in the past 10, 20 years. Most of those cities are now taking a second look at their downtown plans in the wake of the pandemic, and reasonably so. In some cases, it changed how they thought about downtown, and in other cases, it just reinforced what they were doing, that they were doing well, and they knew that they needed to double down on. So that's really the opportunity here to think about downtown Fargo in the context of what's happened in the last 5 years. What the plan said 5 years ago was important for downtown, and how we need to maybe shift our focus or identify some additional actions that's important for downtown going forward. So our role here is to really organize and expand the good things that are in place. This place has momentum, and we want to make sure that the work is capitalizing on the momentum that downtown Fargo has built over the past 5 years, and frankly, longer than that. It is also our job here to think long-term. So while there are definitely short-term issues that we need to acknowledge and address, it's not just a question of what we're going to do in the next 6 months, but what are we going to do in the next 6 years, right? How do we maintain and continue that momentum and really build the downtown that so many folks have worked towards for years? So what has happened in the last 5 years? The experience has evolved significantly. So I can put this in context. Broadway Square did not exist 5 years ago when we did the plan. It was just an idea, so there was no design, there was no programming, there was this question of what the center of downtown was, where did people go to do things. All of that was very much up in the air. We have since that time built a number of units in downtown, housing units downtown. So the population of downtown Fargo has grown. We're at about 4,100. That growth is wonderful. It is also growing not as fast as the city as a whole, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. There's limited land downtown. The more development we have, the fewer lots we have to develop. It just makes it difficult to build. But to see downtown growth, particularly during a pandemic, is really, really remarkable. And you can see on this map, it's the little dotted area in the middle, right? That's the downtown area. You see how important downtown is in terms of investment, in terms of construction activity, building permits, compared to the city as a whole. It is certainly one of the main places where this type of activity is taking place. But we also know how important downtown is for the perception of Fargo as a whole, right? And the role that it plays when you're bringing visitors into town, if you want to go out to eat. It really is a centerpiece for the region. So one of the things we did was to really understand how downtown has changed. So the blue and white parts of this drawing we did 5 years ago. That was just an existing look at downtown Fargo. What we've added in orange are the things that have been built since then. right? So it is quite a bit of development activity and quite a bit of change. And this graphic is actually hanging up on the back wall for anyone that wants to spend a little more time with it after this talk. We've seen quite a bit of changes in terms of use. So when you look at these maps, the quick way that I always understand them is I kind of squint and I look for the orange. So the orange on these maps is what's mixed use. So typically commercial with some housing above. And you see how much more orange there is on the right than there is on the left, right? So what was once parking lots or undeveloped land is now a lot more stuff, more houses, more retail, more things to do. So we've been tracking how much has been built. It's about 800 units in the past 5 years, 300 million in private investment. That certainly surpasses quite a few downtowns that we are very familiar with, and downtowns in cities that are larger. So it's a really remarkable amount of investment. But with it, it brings its own challenges, and that's part of the reason we should be updating this work today. We need to think about what it's like to build in an area where there is less and less land to build on. Right? So this map of vacancy, everything that's gray is technically empty. Well, if it's hatched, it's empty. If it's just gray, it's surface level parking. So when we did this map 5 years ago, there was a lot more gray and hatched on this graphic than there is now. So we're going to be competing for fewer and fewer bits of land in which to build more housing and more commercial and more stuff downtown, which means the prices will go up, and it does raise concerns about affordability and how we maintain a mix of things that are happening in our downtown area. You've had a number of great press, a lot of great press actually, I would say even in just the past month. Ashley and I have been joking like, okay, what article is going to get sent to us this week about how great downtown Fargo is? This was 2 weeks ago. There was a Wall Street Journal one this week. It's been recognized, and I think the leap that has been made over the past 5 years is now something that is hitting national press. We looked at every single strategy in this document, so this was the original downtown plan 5 years ago, and we asked the question, okay, is the strategy complete? Is it in progress? Does it need work? We expected to see quite a bit needing work given the pandemic and how much the pandemic has shifted the attention of just about everyone that's normally involved in implementing a downtown plan, but you have over 50% that's in progress or complete. So that, given the pandemic, really remarkable progress. There still means that there's a lot more to do, not just to implement the plan that we have, but maybe to address some additional actions and opportunities that are there today. So I'm gonna, with all of that great change, I thought it'd be good to kind of remind everyone what some of the big ideas were in the context of the last downtown plan, and then we can take a few questions. At this stage in the process, what we've really done is really assess downtown over the past 5 years, understand how much has been implemented, and we're starting to have conversations of, okay, if this wasn't implemented, why? What do we need to do? Does it need more resources? Does it need more people looking at it? Does it need more coordination? All of these are questions that we're asking because the real focus here is about implementation and continuing the trajectory that downtown is on. So in the last plan, I'm gonna kind of call out like 12 of the, I would say the most important actions or the things that came up time and time again and occupied all of the conversations we had when we had public events. We had an online presence during the last plan. There was a lot of public outreach that helped to shape the document. And so some of this, of course, had to do with making sure that downtown continues to grow as a neighborhood. One of the interesting things that we've seen in the post-pandemic, I'm not sure how post we are, but post-pandemic is that the cities that have required or that have recovered the fastest are the cities that have the highest number of people living in their downtowns, right? So folks that are doing remote work or downtowns that devoted too much attention to tourism or office space at the expense of housing, they are the ones that are struggling more, which makes sense, right? There are fewer people downtown, there's fewer customers, fewer people supporting the businesses. For the downtowns that have more housing, there's more people there to support the businesses. So in the last plan, we talked quite a bit about what it means to make sure that downtown is a healthy neighborhood. Some of this has to do with the growth in downtown itself, and some of it also has to do with the health of the neighborhoods around downtown. So making sure that we're protecting some of the single-family housing, but that we're also upgrading the housing that's in really poor shape, that there just hasn't been resources to do. There was once a program here in Fargo that provided some funds to rehab older single-family homes, right, to ensure that they become the assets and good neighbors to everybody else in those neighborhoods. We talked about adapting the land development code in downtown. So right now, your land development code, particularly for downtown, is really, really permissive. Normally in a city, we would say your downtown code is way too restrictive. You need to loosen this up a little bit. In downtown Fargo, we were saying a little bit of the opposite, which is, look, it's so permissive that you could almost build just about anything. And some of those things are not things that people have told us they would like to see downtown, like surface parking lots, or where the building is placed, right? Is the front door to the commercial area facing the street? Are we putting parking in the right places when we're developing up a site? So we made some observations about the land development code. I know that there's going to be a larger rewrite of the land development code later in concert with looking at growth overall across the city. So that is something that's been teed up for discussion to think about how do we manage investment and growth, not just in downtown, but citywide. We talked about really being strategic around where we put retail. And so I think the pandemic has really brought this into relief. There is not a retail apocalypse in the country, but there is a significant change in retail. So certainly more retail has moved online. That has hurt some existing business models. We work in a lot of cities now that have retail corridors where there's vacancies, and they've been vacant for a long time. And even places like downtown Atlanta, which is a much bigger city, they can't put retail everywhere. They have to be strategic about where they focus their retail activity. Otherwise, it just becomes this kind of scattershot of retail, and you don't really get the benefits of having your neighbor that has a store, right? And shoppers going from one store to the next. So what we talked about before was making sure that Broadway, that's a no-brainer, Roberts, parts of Main Avenue, all become these kind of centers of retail activity in downtown. And if you're not on one of those streets, that doesn't mean you shouldn't have retail, but it means that we should also be encouraging ground floor office use and other types of ground floor uses so that we're not diminishing the value of retail where it really matters the most. We mentioned quite a bit about Moorhead, and we're thinking of this as two cities, one downtown, which meant Main Avenue that really needed to be reconsidered. So looking at new development, we know that there's a proposal for some development today, but also looking at redesigning the street. So 5 years ago, that street was 5 lanes wide. It is now a lot different in terms of a gateway to Moorhead and vice versa. So I think that's something we'll want to look at again in the context of this work. And also look at the Mid-America Steel site. This is the largest publicly owned property in downtown currently. It's also a property with a lot of challenges. Right? Anytime you have a former industrial use, particularly something related to steel, means there's lots of money that has to go into the property to clean it up before it's even ready for development. So we know that this is in progress, some of the cleanup activities, but what the future of this site will mean a lot to the future of downtown Fargo and the region as a whole. We certainly talked a lot about celebrating the arts downtown and thinking through the experience of downtown. So whether you live here, work here, or visit on occasion, that experience needs to be really, really powerful because that's what's going to bring you back or have you move your business here or decide to live in or near downtown. So Broadway was a particular concern for folks 5 years ago. It wasn't a concern in that it needed a total overhaul, but it was looking a little old, right? The streetscape that was done years ago was really, really helpful, and it helped to focus investment on Broadway, and it's really served Fargo well. At some point, it's an opportunity to look at it and say, okay, is this still working? Should we think about some redesign? How do we maintain Broadway effectively? What we had talked about in the last plan was actually creating more public space along Broadway. This has already happened as a part of the response to the pandemic. So it's interesting to see how cities where we would say before, like, hey, we should be creating some parking space or some public space within on-street parking lots, that this was kind of foreign to a lot of cities, and then the pandemic hit, and now everyone's tried at least some version of this. I think that's an opportunity for us to think about public space along Broadway for the entire stretch of the street, but also now in the context of Broadway Square, these things should be supporting existing businesses and providing places for families to rest, even when Broadway Square is really active and there's a lot of things happening there. Programming. One of the most effective ways that you can improve downtowns and generate economic development is by programming. And Fargo does a great job of programming. Even back 5 years ago, you had a couple annual events that bring in tens of thousands of people. You now have weekly things like farmers markets that's bringing in 8,000 people. There's a lot of folks coming to downtown Fargo for different reasons. We think there's an opportunity, at least we certainly thought so 5 years ago, that do all of those programs have to happen on Broadway? Is there room to spread some of those programs onto Second or onto Roberts, or even now onto some of the other streets where there is development, so that other businesses also see some of that same activity that you see when you bring in these types of programs to the city? So we talked a lot about programming. I think that's still important. It's really interesting to see how much programming is happening today, even compared to 5 years ago when you were already doing a great job. The streets are critical downtown, critical in every downtown. We look at streets from the standpoint of, when we look at downtowns, not every street can be beautiful, right? It's really important to recognize that there's A streets in downtowns. Those are streets like Broadway. And then there's B streets where you need to put out your garbage and you need to access loading and those kinds of things. In some cases, Fargo has the advantage of alleyways that serve some of those B street functions, which is really important, and it makes it easier for us to invest more in the main streets around them. We made a bunch of proposals previously, oops, sorry, I went too far, about actually redesigning some of these streets to integrate things like parking, bike lanes, street trees. Those are things that I think are still relevant and probably a conversation we should continue to have, right? How do we bring more of those amenities to downtown Fargo? Parking, of course, is always a challenge in any downtown, and even a downtown that has more and more stuff being built means there's more demand for parking. Most cities would be very envious, I think, to have some of what Fargo has, which is a number of parking garages that serve a number of developments around those garages, right? So it's a lot more efficient to be building one garage that serves multiple developments than building a garage attached to each and every development, right? So that is an efficient use of space. I think that's been effective to get us so far. And I think now we have to continue to think, as we have more people downtown and visitors, how are we managing parking even temporarily? How are we improving ways to get around downtown that maybe doesn't involve a car, at least for the non-winter months, where it's a real possibility? Open space, this relates to the downtown experience, but one of the opportunities we saw years ago was to look at ways to bring more trees, landscaping, and greenways to downtown. We identified a couple specific opportunities, and these are actually, both of those two lines there are the railroad lines. Now, we're not looking at getting rid of railroads, of course. The railroads are there to stay, but there is a lot of excess space adjacent to those railroads. And if you begin to follow the link of that adjacent space further and further out, you actually end up connecting into a regional trail network that would be really, really effective and powerful for downtown Fargo. This is one of those ideas that's a kind of a big idea. It's going to take a lot of work and effort to make it happen. But if we think about recreation in downtown as something that's really valuable and things that we can invest in, it's what helps to make downtown even more unique. In City Hall Plaza, I see them setting up for the Kris Kringle Market that's going to open on Thursday. That was a particular concern 5 years ago. The City Hall had just been built. Actually, it wasn't even completely finished when we were doing this work. So the question was, what happens to City Hall Plaza, that space between City Hall, the library, the Civic Center? How should we envision that space and how should we think about it being programmed? What the plan included were a couple options that I think are still in discussion today. There was an option that showed most of the space being dedicated to programming, like a lawn and a stage and some outdoor space. I would say with Broadway Square, this is not necessary. We have that space for those kinds of formal events. But we also had an option that included a little bit of development within that space. So basically the southeast corner, we had showed some potential development that would help to frame what happens on City Hall Plaza, but then also to create what we were calling a land bridge, or this really powerful connection between City Hall Plaza to the river. Now, I know that that is also one of those big ideas that encompasses a lot of money and a lot of effort. I think it's worth for us to continue to talk about what this might mean as an idea, but really the question for us is about City Hall Plaza itself. It's a block off Broadway. We know that 2nd Avenue gets programmed from time to time. How do we envision City Hall Plaza going forward in light of what we know today and in light of what the opportunities are for downtown? One thing this drawing doesn't show is potentially a performing arts center. This is something that was discussed 5 years ago. It's still in discussion. I think wherever that lands will have a big impact depending upon where it lands. If it landed here, it will have one kind of impact. If it lands on a different site, those are things that we need to integrate into the thinking about where we're going downtown, because that's going to draw a lot of attention and people to downtown when there are events. Greening. We'd love to see a lot more greening in downtown. You have this challenge in downtown Fargo where you have flooding from the river that everybody here knows about, but then you also have localized flooding because it's extremely flat and you have clay underneath your streets and buildings, which doesn't really allow water to permeate. So you end up, if it rains really quickly, you get pooling and some flooding within downtown streets just because the water has nowhere to go. And if it does make its way toward the river, then you have to pump the water into the river. Right? So there are some real economic challenges here that are based upon our ability to handle stormwater. Right? How do we manage stormwater in the streets? But because we have clay streets, this is not one of those things that you can just start putting in what's called rain gardens. Other cities put in these kind of detention areas that's landscaped where the water slowly seeps into the ground. That's not going to work as well here because of the soil conditions. But we did suggest thinking about catch basins, right? So basins within the streets when we're redeveloping the streets entirely. We integrate these catch basins, which can serve as a water source for more trees, and that would help to improve the tree coverage within downtown. But this is something that will take, of course, decades to accomplish, and it would have to be done block by block, street by street. But I think it's worth, again, us talking about having more trees and greenery within downtown Fargo, because that is only going to enhance the experience that makes downtown great to visit in the first place. And then the last plan also talked about inclusive growth and development. I mentioned affordable housing. I think it's really critical to talk through what it means to build affordable housing, and I'm using quotes because it encompasses a lot of different things. Affordable housing is not a one-size-fits-all kind of solution. And we have to be strategic about how we use our public land to support affordable housing. But it also means we have to think about how we're addressing the challenges of those experiencing homelessness. The day center here, the engagement center in downtown, is something that was a part of the last plan to make sure that we were addressing the challenges that business owners were expressing to us, which is that those that didn't have a place to live were in downtown all day, they had nowhere to go or access services. There is a lot more to do here, 100%. And we've been talking to a number of cities across the country about how they are addressing the challenges that they're facing around homelessness. And there's a range of solutions that folks are trying, but this is a national issue at this point. And I want to reinforce that while there are things that we can do here in Fargo, this is a challenge that other cities are facing, both small and large cities. And so I want us to be real about what we're really engaged in here and how much effort it's going to take to fully address. So those were the big 12 ideas, I would say, in looking at them and what we know about downtown Fargo and how it's changed over the past 5 years. I think there's a lot here that's still relevant, but I think there's also a lot of questions. A few things haven't moved forward, and I would love to see them move forward. Are all of these still relevant? These are the conversations we're having now. And are we missing anything, really blatantly missing anything that needs to be integrated into the next stage of Fargo's growth? So with that, I will take any questions. Is this for me, or is this just left by somebody else? Excellent, thank you. She's bringing a cube to you.
So did you consider open space in downtown or at least preserving the open space we've had? Because there's been 2 instances where I think that we've gone backward, and that was with Block 9. So we had a nice large open space right on Broadway, our most popular street, which was parking lots, but they were used regularly for different festivals and things. And it was a really successful open space, and now we've stuck a huge high-rise in it, which throws shade down onto Broadway, and it's taken up at least half of that open space. And then secondly, land along the river, our waterfront, which is so important to cities around the world, is now being developed. So we're putting luxury housing into those places, and more and more housing, and we're losing it. So are you aware of like cities like Boston, in which they've actually spent billions of dollars to recover their waterfront by covering over freeways with parks, putting the freeways into tunnels? So they're going the opposite. We're going the opposite direction that cities are going. So we're not looking. I don't think we're looking forward 50 or 100 years by filling up that's the best open space, is the waterfront space, because the public loves to have parks in which they can see a water feature. We've got Island Park, but it doesn't have any water feature.
Okay. Yeah, fair. And I would say you're picking up on a number of things that we are talking about, right? Which is, what's the correct balance of use, right? How do we envision growth happening going forward in downtown? How do we maintain and design spaces that will bring people together? And for what purpose, right? That's always the question for me. When Boston covered their highway, they had a very clear idea of what they were covering it for and how it was going to be programmed and function, right, as a centerpiece to the city. So I think those are valuable questions for us as we go forward, and to think about how those spaces really are, maintained, and the centerpiece of downtown. Other questions?
Okay, yeah, one of the things that seemed like it was part of the plan earlier and probably has been since is the quality of life issue with downtown as a neighborhood connected to the other neighborhoods. And I haven't heard too much about that. I know in recent time we've had a lot of complaints about quality of life in downtown because of a number of factors. But secondly, I'd like to just say that the quality of life also involves, for instance, the Parks District and the school district. So I would think that any discussions that would take place would need to include them. For instance, in the neighborhoods, it's important that we have strong elementary schools so that we keep the populations of people who would like to have children in neighborhoods. We need the children. So how is it that we integrate? For instance, in talking about Broadway Square, of course, that was a parks project. And to think about these questions without including the other entities that are really important to create quality of life, I just didn't know how you had been going about incorporating them.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a real focus of this update. If I could generally summarize, 5 years ago, I think our concern was how do we bring more people downtown, because when there's not a big event, there wasn't as many people downtown as we would have liked to have seen. It was really about generating some additional energy, and now I think we've succeeded in that, and we have some growing pains, and some of those are around quality of life issues, right? If I'm a family looking to find a house, are there units that are suitable for what I'm looking for? Or even just the day-to-day things around crime, perception of crime. We really want to get into the details of the existing ordinances and also the management structure downtown to see who is involved in addressing these different issues and try to find ways to help streamline some of those responses, because that is the big question now. We have to look forward, what's happening 6 years from now, but we have to solve and address those quality of life challenges. Otherwise, we're kind of missing some of those opportunities and it'll turn some people off. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
So the question will always come, who's going to do the next part of this, of making things happen? And Nicole's right in front of me, so I'm just curious, is she going to assign somebody from the planning department, they're going to take care of it, boom, we're going to get all done? Or is there some responsibility the neighborhood has to do, our downtown business partners? What is it that will make us take the next steps? Because if we're going to address quality of life, it truly, you need everybody involved to do that. And the parks have been great with us. I would challenge that when we say Broadway Square has not brought something different to downtown, it has. And Jasper Hotel and that whole complex has really changed the face of downtown Fargo. But it's all of it, it's developing, and Mercantile's coming, and you in your stuff, I really love it, of all the stuff that's filled in 5 years, and that's been a great thing. But before I go to Nicole tomorrow and say, how are you gonna get all this done, I just want to know where your views are. Who should be responsible for expediting the in-focus?
Yep. Organizational capacity is gonna be the word that I'm gonna put out there right now. This is really important, and one of the most effective models we see in cities that are both small and large is where there is a really well-staffed and resourced downtown organization that can manage a good bit of the things we're talking about. Some of it quality of life, some of it streetscape design and maintenance. If we wanted to do parklets, like that's a great role. Promoting downtown, they have a lot of different roles that a downtown organization can be playing, but it needs to be properly resourced and staffed. And then there's an important role for the city to play, of course, because the city is in charge of saying yes or no to certain changes on streets, to the ordinances and the codes that help regulate development. Right, so the cities that have really taken off in this regard have a really powerful downtown organization with effective city partnership. All of that is running in the same directions with the partners that are helping to make this go. So it's coordination in addition to really looking at who is actually going to be doing this work. So before you tell Nicole to go do everything, we already know that, of course, the planning department has a lot on their plate. So this is the opportunity, I think, for us to step back and say, well, if some things aren't happening, but we all agree they're important, let's come together as a community and figure out the best way to put the resources behind it so that we can.
I would just like to ask if anybody, what is the status of the downtown organization now? It seems like it's always kind of there, but etheric in some ways. And there was, I'm on downtown, on Broadway down here, and we're a member, but we always ask ourselves whether we should be or not because of the benefits. We had a long discussion with the person that's head of the organization. She said really that they've come down to their one task per year, and that's to put on the street fair. I know there are other aspects like the bid, but that's a little bit different organization. So I'm wondering how it is that that downtown organization can be strengthened so that it provides greater benefits to the people who would like to invest in it if they could see outcome.
You want to start or do
Why don't you start, then I'll jump.
Yeah, maybe as an update on the Downtown Community Partnership and the Business Improvement District, the BID, is, one, first and foremost, they absolutely provide a benefit. And if they were not functioning, then you would see a lot more issues in downtown than you see today. And both for the BID and the DCP. The BID is really our day-to-day boots on the grounds, taking care of being our front line of, greeting customers, greeting people, helping people find their way, dealing with nuisances. And so both as a special assessment district that they are as a maintenance assessment district, if you will, that those memberships support, as well as the DCP community, Downtown Community Partnership. They really are our front lines in communication. Back in the historical days, I guess in the last 20 years, you might have had one lead staff planner as well as the president of the time of the Downtown Community Partnership, and really being the champions of downtown and getting all the things done. But really, today it requires armies of 30, 40 people from various capacities: public works, solid waste, engineering, police, planning, inspections. There's many people at the staff level that touch downtown, as well as the membership of the Downtown Community Partnership. And so that's one of the reasons, or one of the roles we hope, Scott's team is really helping us build synergy between our organizations and understand what those gaps are and understand who can do what in bigger depth, if you will.
Yeah.
So that's my first attempt at that answer.
No, that's perfect. I appreciate that. And I'm glad the question came up because I agree with you, Nicole. Downtown absolutely needs that organization. And what we see in other downtowns is that as they grow in number of residents and number of businesses and more people and more events, those downtown organizations grow in concert with that, right? Because there's more to manage, there's more to clean up, there's more to do. And I think that's an important lesson for us to take away.
Maybe just to add to that, I think if Cindy, right now we don't have a DCP member or the staff here with us today. Also a shout out tonight, they have a 4 o'clock event, 4 to 6 event, a social at their, at Fargo Brewery. And so if you're interested in learning more about DCP or the BID, I would encourage you to go to that event. And, what was I gonna say? Oh, if Cindy was here, I think Victor and Cindy right now are really talking about little things like biohazards in downtown. Their daily work, along with many other business owners, of just keeping downtown clean and safe. They have the equipment, they have the trucks, they have the tools to help do that. And so that's another, kind of really important role that they're playing in supporting our neighborhood.
One of those drawings you showed was interesting. It was a diagram of the street, and you said that we're very lenient, I think, with development, and it showed what appeared to be an encouragement to move the building forward, closer to the street, and put parking in on the sides or in back. But I'm wondering about that because I would say, for instance, on our main avenue, my criticism would be that the buildings are all too close to the street, and then that forces the only sidewalks to be right along traffic, where you're exposed to the danger and the noise. And what kind of design features encourage more people to walk and stay on the streets there?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great question. There are lots of great examples of design guidelines that help to address those issues, right? So on the one hand, we want to encourage more of the active things that are facing to face the street. So if there's a storefront with a door, we want that facing the street as much as possible and not just putting up a blank wall. At the same time, there are many instances where being too close to the street can make it feel rather crowded. And if we're not thinking carefully about the design of that front space and the facade, it can be an issue. And so it's something that we would encourage integrating into either the land development code, much on our mind as well. It's not as simple as saying, well, we'll just move the buildings up. Sometimes that can be helpful, but you can't say that without putting in the requisite expectations for, well, what's the goal of moving the building up, right? We want more transparency at the street. We want more activity. If that's the goal, then there are some ways that we can look at the design of the street and the building to help accomplish it. Any other questions? Okay. I will say thank you. Appreciate the time.